that were trained for World War II, we had to first teach young men how to fly. That was done in a trainer called a PT, or primer. Then we went up to a more complex airplane after they knew how to fly. That was a BT, or basic trainer. And then if you look forward to the left, the last phase of its training was in the advanced trainer, the AT. This is still left, LEFF. Trainer Model 6, known affectionately in the Army Air Corps as the Texan. Bill Leff executing a 4-point roll on takeoff. Now, this isn't a modern young ballerina. This is a big 5,500-pound airplane. The technology of this airplane goes back to the late 1930s. The production run was between 1938 and 1945, which means the youngest of these beauties are 65 years of age, and the oldest of these are 73 or thereabouts. So that's the level of technology. But Bill Leff is going to dance with this large beauty and make it look graceful. But understand, it's not easy because of the technology time period and the weight of the airplane and the weight of the Now with that spectacular leaning off the blue footage of the aircraft, that is hours and hours of polish by Bill Leff. This is the most remarkable guy. He grew up in the same neighborhood in Dayton, Ohio. The neighborhood called Hawthorne Hill, where the Wright brothers grew up and developed the airplane at the turn of the century. He heard the stories as a kid. He was influenced by the nearby Wright-Patterson Air Force Base and the Moraine Air Park, where a group of barnstorming open cockpit air show pilots headquarters. When most kids were buying gum and candy and Bill had a paper route. He wasn't squandering his money. He was saving every penny for flying lessons, and it paid off. So this would be the last airplane that a pilot would get into before he got up into his fighter plane, into his transport, or the bomber. In fact, the cockpit of this airplane is similar to the cockpit of the North American P-51. Manufacturer was the same for this airplane as it was for the P-51 that we'll fly two different versions of later on today. And the cockpit was even similar to the B-25, like the Panchito that you saw fly earlier. There were about 15,000 plus of these aircraft and their variants built. It was one of the most produced aircraft in World War II and the highest production training. For that reason, it was used by no less than 50 around the world as a trainer. And then, in the case of some smaller banana republics, as Bill Leff does the big inside or barnstormer sloops, he will hesitate on the 45-degree descending line, roll the airplane to the right side of the all the way around as he performs for you a maneuver that has a funny name. It's called the Cuban 8. It is the figure 8 that he dealt with the white smoke of the aircraft with the figure 8 laying on its side. It has an interesting history. That maneuver goes back to 1936. It was invented quite by accident in Miami by Len Colby, who was flying an aerobatic contest, and at that time was chief aerobatic instructor for Batista's Cuban Air Force. And Bill Leff, the pilot, and I, the pilot, continued to make that maneuver to give an aid from that strange relation with that country's dictator. Well, more about Bill Leff. Not only has he been an air show pilot for about 35 years now, Friday night under cover of darkness, he loaded down this airplane with pyrotechnics and high-intensity lights, and he puts on one of the most dynamic fixed-wing night pyrotechnic shows with fireworks streaming off the wings and high-intensity lights and some movie-type music. It is awesome to see. Maybe some of you were here. So that's part of what he does. He has been a corporate pilot for most of his life. He was an instructor pilot at an airline for a period of time. He has been an airline pilot. He was also a test pilot. He's got a twin engine cabin airplane that he fills up with experimental radio gear from the individuals who do research and development for the Wright Patterson Air Force Base. He takes their new concepts up and see what vibration and heat or cold and altitude will do to their reliability and their endurance. But there's another great story about this man, and it involves about 5 million dollars. Here's the story. Several years ago, many of our guys were down doing a show in Illinois the week before that giant extravaganza flying in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. The Illinois show was done. Bill and a lot of the pilots were heading for Oshkosh. Bill was cruising up there. He got to a town south of Oshkosh called Fond du Lac. Fond du Lac has its own airport. It's right on Highway 41 that runs north and south from Milwaukee up towards Green Bay. Well, that's about 20 miles south of his landing spot at Oshkosh. The engine burnt once, and Bill, he got his attention. He looked at the gauges, and everything looked okay, and then the worst thing possible happened. The engine stopped. The prop froze. The engine froze. Well, what he had then was a very inefficient glider. He looked at the Fond du Lac Airport. Knowing this airplane, he knew he didn't have the glide ratio to make it to an emergency landing. He would merely crash short of the runway. So what is one of the most ideal landing strips all over America? A highway. And Highway 41, which has 2 lanes northbound, divided by some sod and then 2 lanes southbound. Saw big clear open space on the northbound lanes and decided to put it down. He had no choice. Now things were going well until out of his peripheral vision, as he is about to touch down on the main gear, from the on-ramp comes a police car. Now certainly the policeman didn't see Bill because he's used to looking on the surface for traffic. He got in front of Bill, not knowing Bill was behind him. Bill had enough speed in this airplane to hop over the police car, fly over the top of the police car, and then landing in front of the policeman who had it all on one of those dash-mounted cameras. Well, that was not a happy policeman. Bill stopped with the help of a highway sign hitting his right wing. The policeman stopped, and he got out, and he said to Bill, who was nonchalantly climbing out of the airplane, "What do you think you were doing?" And Bill said, "Not to worry, officer, we're all okay, but please follow me to the engine." The policeman was not happy. His face was red. He was livid. He said, "Officer, would you do me a favor and move that propeller?" So the officer got up there, tried to move the propeller. Sure enough, the engine was frozen. And he said, "Now, officer, put that in your report, because sure enough, some empty suit is going to claim that I ran out of fuel. And now you know that the engine froze." So the cop became his friend. Bill, they towed the airplane off the highway with a damaged right wing as it hit that 4x4 sign. Now, Bill back doing the tribute to the Harrier, he's got a well, just above the point at which the wings will no longer fly, and that's called the stall, flying at about 60 knots of ground speed, right on the feather's edge. So, all good stories come to a happy ending. They towed the airplane to the Fond du Lac Airport by tearing down a fence from the road to the airport, parked it at the airport, and within 2 weeks, Bill and the airplane, with a non-shiny wing, were out doing their air show. But here's the happy ending. Because of Oshkosh, that film made the news. Our friends were calling from New York City saying Bill Leff is on the news every 5 minutes. The publicity is amazing of this shot from the policeman's dash-mounted camera. And then we had friends over in the Middle East doing shows. Way over in the Middle East. And they called back and they texted back and said it's all over the news in the United Arab Emirates as well. So that little bit of business, that emergency landing where this pilot kept his cool and landed the airplane the way you're supposed to do it, it got him, we think, between $1 and $2 million of publicity. And now, the rest of the story. Those gleaming wings don't happen by accident on a metal airplane. To keep that mirror finish, you've got to do two things. Keep it out of the elements, and you've got to polish and polish and polish. Bill Leff flies this World War II trainer now in civilian hands as a tribute to all of our veterans. First in the daytime environment and also very proficient and one of the most exciting and dynamic nighttime pyrotechnic shows. By the way, we talked to you about that twin-engine cabin airplane loaded with test equipment. Talking to Bill on Thursday and Friday, he's in the first process of purchasing yet a second and third airplane because he has so much work. There's the 4-point hesitation rule, stopping in the inverted flight position. And that's the right side up position again. Bill salutes the veteran. In the smaller countries, as I mentioned, this airplane did a twofold job. It was a trainer during peacetime for the smaller South American countries, and then in the event they got into a skirmish or a war with one of their neighboring countries, they could outfit this airplane on the hard point underneath the wing with a light bomb roller and even some machine guns. So it became a trainer in peacetime and then a light fighter attack and even a bomber during times of skirmishes. The deep ground is it is a round or radial engine, as they're called. They are air-cooled. Cooling for the engine comes across a series of fins, much like the cooling on your lawnmower, as opposed to the liquid cooling on your Ford car or truck. Well, let's not forget the men and women in uniform from every branch of the service, and those on the home front keeping our country safe. To those on the battlefield, if you're interested in an Air Force career, Air Force recruiters are on site today. Recruiters from the Air National Guard, the U.S. Army, and the U.S. Navy are also on site, willing and able to answer your questions. With the scraping run, Bill Leff in the photo tank. By the way, those are Korean markings that Bill has researched out of the archives of Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Yes, the airplane was used into the Korean era as a trainer aircraft. And Bill painstakingly got all of the stars and bars and the markings and even the squadron identification letters and numbers to duplicate the service in the Korean War. Aircraft also used out in Reno, Nevada as one of the class and categories of racing aircraft. The Army Air Corps called them the AT-6. The U.S. Air Force changed the designation in 1948 to merely T-6. The Navy called the same airplane the SNJ, meaning Naval Trainer, with the J designating the predecessor country to North America was the Berliner Joint Corporation. Now the Canadians built them in that country as well. They were used by the Canadians in World War II and the British, and they chose to call this same airplane the Harbour. There were a number of variants. One was the Yale that was also built in Canada. It had a different engine of a little bit less horsepower and a fixed landing gear. They were built in limited number. And then the Aussies built one called the Whirlaway. They put a big 1,000 horsepower engine on the front, and they made it a formidable fighter and ground attack aircraft. Oh, this is bad news, folks. I've just been given an emergency announcement. We have an unattended dog. And I guess that's in a car, I would guess. It is a silver Ford Explorer, Virginia plate. Oh, I hate to bring your name up, but David and Angela Vaughn, the authorities are worried about your dog. Folks, don't do that. Vaughn, please go to your car. You have some people waiting for you there. The unattended dog on a hot day like this with the greenhouse effect. Oh, Lord. Well, let's make some happy news. Langley Federal Credit Union and your local Ford deal is proudly salute AirPower over Hampton Road. Bill Leff taxi or landing in front of you now on the main landing here. That's called a wheel landing, usually done in a crosswind environment. Keeping the tail up for a while to get forward visibility, then the tail comes down, then all forward visibility over that engine is lost, and the skill of the pilot to stay on runway center line is to keep equal distance concrete on the left as it is on the right.